Something we like to say around the e-commerce alley is that marketing is a mathematical equation, not an emotional decision, which is obviously, it's way easier said than done. But what's kind of fascinating to me is how many people want to make very objective decisions, but they let the subjectivity of their mind get in the way of their decision making, especially when it comes to marketing. And so most people don't run the numbers to really understand what their math has to look like in order to really win at the thing that they're doing, whether it's advertising or it's even a different form of a marketing channel. We have to understand our numbers in the math, or what'll happen is our emotion kind of gets involved. And so something that it's been a huge conversation in our community lately is, which by the way, if you're not part of the Ecommerce Alley Facebook group, go check it out. Go to the ecommercealley.com/group. Check it out, little plug there. But what I wanna do is I wanna cover kind of 4 things to help you in making great decisions with your ads. And this is around a lot of questions we get is like, when do I decide to turn things off? When do I decide to cycle in new ads? And when do I know to increase or decrease and things like that? And so I wanna cover our methodology for this, and it uses 2 things. We have kill switches and we have ad cycling. And so I wanna cover a couple things today. I wanna cover how to determine your metrics and what type of business you are. There are 3 types I'm gonna cover. You have to determine what type of business, and then based on that, what your metrics are going to be, so you know what's the score. Am I winning? Am I losing? Am I hitting this number or not? Then the second thing I'm gonna cover is how to establish your kill switches. And then I'm gonna talk about once kill switches flip, how do we then cycle in new ads? And I'm gonna do a little bonus at the end. I'll show you how we automate the process so that way it really helps us remove this emotion from our decision making, especially when it comes to ads. So the first thing you have to do, if you're an advertiser on any channel, you have to first understand like what's your objective based on your business. So I look at, in the e-commerce world, I look at businesses in one of 3 different categories. We have a margin-based business, an LTV-based business, and a hybrid-based business. And knowing which of those 3 types you are is going to determine what your target KPIs and your kill switches are going to be. So let me explain. So the first type is what I call a margin-based product. This is a product that you have to make your money going in. It's a product that like most people don't come back and buy again, or they buy very infrequently. Like it might be years apart from the second transaction. And so if you're a margin-based product, you have to make your money going in. You probably have something like 80% margin in your products after the cost of goods sold. So you have high margin. And what that means is you have to be very profitable on your ads because you can't rely on this lifetime value that takes place over 5 years, because you need to realize your return sooner than 5 years from now. And so a margin-based product, like we used to work with a hard shell rooftop tent. It was like a $3,500 rooftop tent. I actually have one on our Explorer, but it goes on your car and it's $3,500. You can buy some accessories in the beginning, but other than that, it has a lifetime warranty. So like if it breaks, they just replace the pieces of it. And so in that scenario, that was a margin-based product. And because of that, we had to then adjust our objective accordingly. Now, the second type is an LTV-based product. This generally means you have lower margin. You might have like 35 or 40% margin, but you have a high lifetime value. This is typically things like subscription boxes. Food and beverage can kind of fall in this as well, because it has a replenishable, like you'll have the residual purchases that start to come through, but you have low margin. So that's what we call an LTV-based product, where we don't expect to be as profitable on the front end, but in the long haul, that's where we make our money. And then we have hybrids. Hybrids are usually, as far as like the price to ship them is usually very low. So think supplements might be a hybrid where you have the margin of 70, 80% margin, and you have the lifetime value, whether it's a replenishable or if it's a subscription. So then you have these hybrids. Now, based on which of those 3 you're in, you then need to determine your metrics, which will guide your decision-making with kill switches and ad cycling. So with that said, if you are a margin-based product, you're probably gonna have to have a higher minimum KPI of hitting. So your target return on ad spend is probably gonna be higher than an LTV-based product, or your target cost per acquired customer is gonna be less than a margin-based product, if you're doing an LTV-based product, because you know I'm not gonna make as much money on the front end. Heck, I might even lose a little bit, but in the next 30 days or 45 days, I will be in the green. And knowing that, you would have to make sure that your true north metric adjusts accordingly. So there are two metrics that most people look at. So when we're making decisions, we typically look at return on ad spend, or we look at CPA or CAC. So they're both used very interchangeably in the advertising world, but they're essentially the same thing. As far as Facebook goes and direct response, they essentially behave the same. So CPA stands for cost per acquisition, and CAC is customer acquisition cost. You can get into the nuances of it, but whatever you want to call it, it's a metric that you can use to make your campaign level decisions at. And so know what type of business you are, and then you're going to have to determine what metrics are you going to be using. Like, what is your true north metric that you make decisions inside your account based upon? Because based on those two things, we can then establish our kill switches. I had a conversation recently. Actually, this episode was sparked by a conversation I had recently with one of our clients. And she has a subscription box, and she had talked to me about how she had thought that when she was acquiring customers at $40 and her box was $35, she would kill things and stop things because I'm upside down on this purchase. It looks bad to me. Like I need to be way less because it's $35. Then I have my cost of goods in there, and so I'm in the red, right? And so after she sat down though to figure out her math, what she realized was her customer lifetime value based on her very low churn was about $600, and the average customer stayed for about 16 months. And so with 40% margins, she ran the numbers, and it came out that she only needs 2.08 payments to have the profit that then threw her over the cost to acquire the customer. So when her cost per acquiring a customer was $40, she only needed 2.08 payment cycles on a new subscriber in order to be profitable on it. And so the problem was though, so basically every month, 34, 35 days, it would basically cash flow itself, and all the remaining months that person stayed on would be profit. So this whole time, she was so focused on being profitable on the front end that she would regularly throttle her ad spend back. But in reality, if she just continued and was steady in acquiring customers slowly, even at $40 a customer, she would have much greater stability in this trail effect that happens, which is very common in subscription boxes. And so, on the other hand, there are businesses we work with that have great numbers. That they might have a break-even return on ad spend or a target of 2.5, and they're doing 4.5. But they get in their heads and they don't know when to kill something or increase budgets, and so they're just kind of paralyzed, or they start decreasing. And it's because you have to know your metrics based on your business. So that's the first thing. Whatever your metric, there are two numbers you need to know, and that is your minimum and your target. So the minimum is the lowest return on ad spend that you're willing to be okay with, or the maximum, the highest cost per acquired customer that you're willing to pay. So depending on your metric, if you use ROAS, your minimum is gonna be a low ROAS number. And if you're using customer acquisition cost or CPA, your minimum is gonna be a dollar number, the most that you're willing to pay. That's your minimum, bare minimum requirement. And then we have our target. So whether it's ROAS or it's customer acquisition cost, whatever you're aiming for, what we typically do is we add a 25% multiplier. So for example, if your minimum ROAS threshold that you're okay with is 2 return on ad spend in your campaigns from a campaign level, then your target would be 2.5 because that is actually 25% multiplier. If you're using CPA or CAC and your target your minimum is 50, I am not paying more than 50, that is the minimum requirement I have. It has to be under $50 to acquire a customer, then your target might be 40. Right? So what happened is the goal is to say, know these numbers so that when I am below my minimum, or the cost is too expensive, or it's below my minimum ROAS, I need to apply kill switches based on that. And then also if I'm above it though, that gives me permission to be above my target. It gives me permission to then begin to scale the budgets. So that's the first thing. You need to know what type of business are you, margin, hybrid, or LTV, and then you have to determine what is your true north metric, are you using ROAS, or using cost per acquisition, or customer acquisition costs? Basically the same thing with small, tiny nuances. And then based on the True North metric, what is your minimum requirement? And then what is your target? Because if we're over target, we begin to increase, we begin to scale. If we are below our minimum, then that means we have some work to do. And that's where the kill switches, which is step 2, comes into place. So now, knowing these numbers, we establish our kill switches. And we kill switch on the ad level unless we're running dynamic creative ads, because there is, in a dynamic creative ad, there is just a combination of things set as one ad. So in that case, you would kill on the ad set level or the campaign level, depending on the structure of how you have your campaigns. But there are 2 primary kill switches that we recommend having, and these apply again on the ad level. Like if you're running an Advantage Plus shopping campaign, there's only an ad level. It would apply on the ad level within that campaign. So kill switch number 1, write this down, is how much you're willing to spend to get the first purchase before turning off the ad. So the first purchase, if you've run ads for any moment of time, you know the first purchase is usually the most expensive purchase. Facebook has you just launch into a new ad set or launch into a new campaign, and Facebook's just beginning to go out and gather data based on behavior and find the right people. So the first purchase is usually the most expensive. We don't expect it to be profitable. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not. It gets profitable and more stable as time goes on. But we believe purchases equals potential. So what that means is the first purchase begins to feed the Facebook machine, and it goes and it finds other people like that very first purchase. So it should ideally it'll be more expensive, and then it'll come down and it'll level out in a cost per purchase or a return on ad spend standpoint. And so the first kill switch is how much you're willing to spend to get that first purchase. Now, this is going to vary based on your business and based on your ad spend level. For newer businesses, and you're not spending a crazy amount quite yet. And in my opinion, this is when you're spending like under $500 a day is where I would say this might apply more to you. And a good example could be 2 to 3 times your average order value on the first purchase. So like, let's say your AOV is 50. Your first kill switch might be $150 to maybe $200 as that first kill switch. Meaning if I spend in that ad, in that campaign, spends $150 or $200, whichever that first kill switch is, and it has 0 purchases, turn off the ad. Now, if you're seasoned and you're running larger budgets, you have to determine what makes sense for you and how much you're willing to invest in that. Sometimes you might know your account pretty well, and you might say, hey, Josh, I know that by the time I've spent $1,000, it usually is a good indicator. I need to spend more than $150 or $200. Some of you have higher average order values, so you might have to just choose a number. Like we have a client that he has a $5,000 product he runs people to, cold traffic, and by the way, crushing it. But for him, he can't spend $5,000 to decide if he gets one purchase or not, or $15,000 because 3 times AOV. That wouldn't apply. In that scenario, he just picked a number, and I believe it was like $300 or $400 that he's expecting to get some degree of traction or a purchase by, or $500 is one of those thresholds. So you determine what that number looks like for you. That's kill switch number 1. How much will you pay for the first purchase before turning it off? Then kill switch number 2 is how much you're willing to spend before needing to be at your minimum KPI. Essentially, the goal is to give Facebook more time to optimize, to find those people after the first purchase, to start working, to like really start having the machine learning kicking in. But at a certain point, you have to decide, when do I actually rule this out? It's like, it got a purchase on day 2, but then all of a sudden it's day 22 and there's nothing happening here. Eventually, you have to make a decision. So we prefer to make this really simple. And we say, okay, if we're willing to spend $150 or $200 to acquire first purchase, then if by $500, where we're 2.5 times that amount, we have to be at our minimum KPI. So if my minimum KPI is return on ad spend, and it's like pretty much my break even, and it's a 1.6, then if I am, by the time I spend $500 on the ad, it may have gotten some traction right up front, but did it sustain when I spent even more? And if by that second kill switch amount, it is not meeting the minimum KPI, whether that's ROAS, CPA, CAC, whatever you're using, then we shut the ad off. Okay? So here's what typically happens. When you launch a campaign that has multiple ads in it, what happens is Facebook's likely gonna latch onto one. And it's very common where you launch with 4 ads into, let's call it an advanced plus shopping campaign. Well, Facebook will spend like 2 cents on this one, 10 cents on this one, $3 on this one, and $1,000 on this one. That's usually what happens. It cycles a couple bucks and then it lashes onto an ad. That's okay. We let that happen. And so if it lashes onto the ad, it's just gonna accelerate the kill switches for that ad. Kill switch number one, how much did we pay before we got the first purchase? If we got none, we shut it off. If we got a purchase, we let it ride until kill switch number 2. Now this kill switch is gonna be higher, let's call it $500 in this example. And if by then we are above our minimum KPI of, let's call it 1.6 return on ad spend, then we let it continue riding. And so that's what's gonna happen. And then if, once we pass kill switch number 2, at that moment in time, we then kind of monitor things on a 7, 14, 30-day trend to say, hey, is this still trending? Instead of using lifetime view when you're looking at that single ad, we'll use trends and say, is it trending up or down, plateaued? As long as it's not trending in a steep downward direction, usually we'll keep things on. But if you want to get a little bit more advanced, little side note, you can just add more kill switches. The concept is still the same. Like you can add kill switches at those higher spend thresholds, like inside the window of time as well. So like if a campaign, for example, is beyond kill switch number 2, it's spent over $500 and now it's like $2,500 in and it's been running for a month, right? So we're past that threshold. If we have gone beyond kill switch number 2 and like in the last 7 days, it has dropped below the minimum KPI, or the last 14 days, it's dropped below our minimum KPI, at that point, you can also turn it off. So these are ways that we can apply kill switches. You might even say, hey, you know what, Josh, I'm gonna go to 500 and then I wanna have a $1,500 kill switch and then I wanna have a $5,000 kill switch to establish, hey, these different thresholds along the way to make sure that we are killing things and turning things off that are not producing in the short, medium, and long-term life cycle inside our ad campaign. So once we have determined our kill switches, as kill switches are reached, we then implement a simple ad cycling system. But before we talk about that, I'm gonna walk through what that looks like. But if you are an advertiser in an e-commerce business and you want our system for how we test ads that, by the way, you could take and you can implement into your ad cycling, then check out our scientific Facebook ads testing course. I break down what we call the ad lab method. It's like 27 bucks. Go to theecommercealley.com/testing and it'll just break down what it'll redirect you and you'll be able to see what the actual program is. It's an on-demand course. It's really fantastic. I'm a little biased, but it'll break down how we test ads to get them into purchase campaigns and cycle them in to like what we're about to talk about in a moment. All right, so once we have established our type of business, we have developed what are our metrics that we're using, CAC, CPA, or ROAS, and then we have established our kill switches. The final thing we're gonna do is we're just gonna simply cycle in new ads as kill switches are flipped. So basically every time an ad hits a kill switch 1 or a kill switch 2, guess what? You cycle in a new ad. That's it. So if I had 4 ads inside an Advantage Plus shopping campaign and the ad spend just latches onto one ad, which is very common, and then that ad hits kill switch number 2 and it's like, hey, kill switch number 2 flipped. It wasn't in our minimum KPI by the time we reached here. Then here's what we do. It's very simple. We shut off that ad. So we shut off that ad. And then what'll happen is we'll inject a new ad into the campaign. So we always have 4, in this example, we always have the same amount running. We inject a new one in, we call it the hopper. So we take it from the hopper and we just load it in. And once we do that, here's what happens. While you shut off the one that's getting the most spend, it goes and it redistributes typically between those other 3 that were like with the original campaign that were already running, while the new one that you injected is going through the approval process. And so we just continue following this process. In doing so allows us to continue harnessing the momentum of that campaign that's already been established without just going, and by the time they're all shut off, we launch a brand new campaign. It allows you to keep going deep, keep spending deep as it's learned in that campaign level, and you just inject new ads. Now, little disclaimer, not all the time, but most of the time, I would say. We see when you inject new ads, you shut one off, you inject new ads, there's a dip in performance for 3 to 5 days, and then usually it comes back up and it stabilizes. That's very, very common. So when we're doing this, we just keep that in the back of our minds. Usually we pause and we inject, it has a little dip, and then it usually comes back up. But guess what? That's okay. Because if you went and you launched a brand new campaign, it would do the same thing, but it would just take longer to learn and begin to optimize. So that's it. That's how we cycle in ads. I'm a simple guy. We like to keep it simple around here, and that's it. We have kill switches. We flip the kill switch. We go in. We inject the new ad. And then finally, if you want to get a little fancy and really remove the emotion from this process, you can just set up automation rules. Set up automation rules that apply on those ad levels inside those campaigns so you don't have to do anything. Set up kill switch number 1. Hey, if $150 is spent and purchases equals less than 1, by the way, that is 0, then turn off ad. You can set these kill switches up inside of Facebook to make this really, really easy so that way, as it hits those thresholds, it shuts it off, and then set it up so that it sends you an alert so you know, hey, kill switch flipped, we need to go in and we need to cycle in a new ad. All right. Well, I hope you found this valuable. I just wanted to get a little tactical in this episode. So if you enjoyed it, please, whatever podcast app you're listening on, just use your thumb, leave us a little review or rate the podcast. It takes like 10 seconds and it would mean so much to us and other people that are trying to learn and find, hey, what podcasts are worth listening to, and those little reviews definitely helps. It shows, hey, other people are listening to this. And if you're on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment if you enjoyed the ad cycling and the kill switch thresholds, and let us know what yours are going to be. We'll see you in the next episode.